Hello, and welcome to Literacy Matters Empowered Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. I'm super excited to talk with Dr. Shawn Datchuk. I've had the privilege of actually facilitating a workshop with Shawn on EdWeb. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thrilled to be here.
Shawn, for our listeners who may be new to your work, can you please share a bit about your background and what drew you to focus so deeply on writing and writing development?
I would love to. So I am a professor of special education here at the University of Iowa. Formerly, I was the director of the Iowa Reading Research Center. I'm also a former K-12 special education teacher, elementary educator, and district administrator. And I have to tell you, to be blunt, I struggled to teach writing when I was a teacher. I sort of thought there's no way I can be alone with that struggle. When it came to like every teacher, I kind of had my teacher bookshelf of kind of my go-tos. And so my reading shelf, there were some things, math shelf, there were some things. My writing shelf was pretty bare, unfortunately. So I said, I need to address this. And so I've devoted the past decade of my life to figuring out what works for writing instruction and assessment, what are some actionable things that teachers can do. So then that way, when you're a teacher in front of a classroom of 30 kids, that is a tough job. There needs to just be easier ways of going about this. So I'm thrilled to be in a position to where, my man, Peter Parker, Spider-Man said it well, with great power comes great responsibility. I don't have a lot of power as a faculty member, but I think that I do have the privilege of thinking for a living. So I think with that privilege, it's my responsibility to figuring out what are things that I can give to teachers, connect with them to make their lives, their jobs a little easier.
Shawn, I love that analogy though of your Peter Parker, and it's I think a lot of teachers feel that way, that they don't quite know what they're doing, and how awesome of you as an educator to go out and say, I'm gonna see what I can do to help educators like myself. So thank you for doing it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It really does change. And while you might not be leaping from building to building with spider webs, I do think that writing is a superpower for sure.
Oh yeah, it is so incredibly complex. I never really realized, particularly as a teacher. I think a lot of teachers, if you take a look at national surveys, a lot of teachers express frustration related to what training they've received, or I should say minimal training they receive on how to teach writing, how writing develops, how to assess it. And so I think that, like thinking about my own experience, I've just heard so many teachers, I've worked with teachers across the country to where they express similar just frustration and wanting to do well for their students. And I can certainly connect with that. And so I think teaching is one of the amazing professions out there in the world, in the United States. So,
for sure, it's such a sacred profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, with all that frustration, what do you believe is like the most misunderstood or underestimated when it comes to writing instruction today?
Oh, that is a great question. I think that so much, just thinking about my own experience as a K-12 student, so let alone as a teacher, I think that there was a predominant sort of way of thinking in across the country that writing was a skill that was caught, so that we could engage students in lots of practice, lots of just meaningful writing experiences, and somehow that students would catch on to writing. And I think, unfortunately, what happened is that lots of students never caught it. So lots of students just kind of it became very difficult for them. I can recall lots of students that I had now is shifting as a teacher to where their first draft was their final draft. So whatever they wrote, that was it. That's what they were going to turn in. And I think that because writing can be incredibly difficult, just having to think through what exactly goes into each word, each sentence, into the overall idea. And so instead of writing being caught, I think what research shows very clearly is that much like reading, early reading skills, and the science of reading has been a big part of this, and the larger message of being that reading skills need to be taught. The same with writing skills. So writing can't be caught, writing needs to be taught. I think that's kind of the bigger idea here.
Oh, wow. Writing, can't be caught. It
Mhm.
needs to be taught.
Yeah.
Love that. And you made this connection to reading. So from a
Mm.
research perspective, Shawn, how do reading and writing actually develop together?
Yeah. I'm so excited about the different ideas, the different teachers, the different researchers that really go out and try to make the deep connection to classrooms about the science of reading. And I think the science of reading has resulted in lots of great improvement in student reading outcomes, particularly at the early elementary grades. And I think that what I am most excited about recently is the entering in of writing into the larger science of reading conversation. So, specifically, I think that there is such a strong interconnection between reading and writing that it is hard to remove the two in practicality. So, we can think about the science of reading as only being student decoding. So, they see text, they see letters, they attach the phonemes or the sounds to letter representations or graphemes. That is a huge part. But just the other side of that coin of decoding is encoding, to where now students can commit to memory these letter shapes, these letter names, and they can now write with their hand. So it's Virginia Berninger, this really great researcher at the University of Washington, has, I think, this really great turn of phrase to where she says reading is language by the eye and writing is language by the hand. So making that connection between what students are reading and what students are writing. And I think you see that across different definitions now of the science of reading, particularly. So I'm in that instance, that would be pretty focused on handwriting and spelling. But what I tend to research would be those really next step skills going from handwriting and spelling to decoding, but now syntax. So now multiple words that students are reading that when they're connected express meaning. Same thing with writing, to where now students can connect multiple words that they write to express something that they want to share about themselves, something that they thought was cool. I have a 4 and an 8-year-old at home. It seems like dinosaurs. I'm at the really fun age with my kids, to where starting about 3 or about 2 or 3, dinosaurs have been a big thing in my house. So, just seeing how now my own kids and then my former students are piecing together these multiple words to express something, in the case of kids in my house, about how cool different dinosaurs are, or what different plates on a dinosaur would do, or why they have long necks and things like that. And I'm sorry, I get kind of excited about those latest things. So hopefully that wasn't too long of an answer.
No, I think that's a fantastic answer. And Shawn, I have to say that I mentioned that we did a webinar together for EdWeb, and
Hmm.
I think it's important for our listeners to know that that's out there. It's free.
Hmm.
It's called Sentence Writing: The Overlooked Element of the Science of Reading.
Hmm.
And you really do a great job of even going more into detail with wonderful slides and so forth. So if people want to know more about how reading and writing develop together, you can certainly check that out for sure. When we think about writing, right, why do you
Hmm.
think sentence level writing is such a critical foundational skill for
Mm.
later success?
Most of my research studies relate to sentence level writing. And I think that one of the reasons why I got into that is, again, I'm a former K-12 special education teacher. I'm also an elementary educator. From early on, from kindergarten all the way through high school, I had so many students that if I gave a writing prompt to, let's say, tell me what you're going to do on winter break, let's say,
Mhm.
students would get very excited. And I had so many students write a lot. Unfortunately, it would be one long run-on sentence usually. I also had some students who would write not a tremendous amount, and those would be kind of short, choppy, incomplete sentences. So it seemed to be one of those areas of writing development that, for whatever reason, kept slipping through the cracks. And so it led me to really think deeply and to research what is it about sentences that are so complicated, whether it's even a simple sentence. Why is it such a complicated skill? And then two, what's the what's the meaning or the relevance of focusing in on that sort of the precious time that goes in an English language arts block? What would be the benefit of teachers focusing on sentence writing? So let's unpack that a little bit. So sentence writing, one of the reasons why it's so complicated is that it serves as the bridge from when students are initially learning how to spell words into now connected text. So again, bringing up my 4-year-old, he loves telling stories, different stories about dinosaurs. He can generate lots of different ideas, very exciting ideas that he's really jazzed about. And that's a huge part of language development, writing development. But when the rubber meets the road, in order for that to be understandable to a reader, to whether it's a teacher or another student, it needs to be in some sort of format that expresses a complete thought, and that to the reader it allows them to say, okay, that's a complete thought, here's another complete thought. And that's where sentences come into play. Sentences allow writers to really think through, this is the idea that's being shared, and here is a series of connected ideas. Now, all the skills involved in that, particularly sentence writing, there's a lot. So there's when you think about just a simple sentence, you need rules of capitalization, so that, okay, here's the beginning of a sentence. That's how we tell our readers, okay, here's the beginning of an idea. Here's a capital letter. Then in addition, if there's proper nouns, if we're naming specific things, those also need to be capitalized, because again, it expresses to a reader that, hey, we're talking about somebody or something very specific. So we have the capital letters. Then we also need spelling. We need handwriting. We need to understand rules of grammar. I can't tell you how many, even through high school, to where, let's say if it was a long run-on sentence, it was very difficult for me to tell who exactly the student was talking about, because the subject-verb agreement, let's say, was kind of all over the place. So I couldn't tell, okay, did all these characters, let's say, go to the baseball game that the student was writing about? Or was it just this one specific one, because the verb that's being used is only talking about this one person that was in the story, but they mentioned like 10 different people. So even just the subject-verb agreement, the syntax, and then also you need to follow just typical semantics, so the meaning, so the fact that we're using words that's understandable to our audience to express something specific, and then we also have punctuation. So the fact that, okay, here's a complete thought. So when you think about it from that perspective, sentences not only help students tie together all these different aspects of writing, it also ties into their reading and their oral language by showing people, here's a complete thought, here's exactly kind of what I'm presenting to you. And without that, it is very difficult to, I would say in some cases almost impossible, to fully appreciate what students are trying to communicate to their audience, whether it's to a different peer that's reading their story or their notes, or whether it's to a teacher.
You're just mentioning all those things that go into writing a sentence. It's more complex than we think. Do they need explicit instruction? Because I know that they do. But tell our listeners why. Why they need it, and what should it look like?
Yeah, so it's students across my studies, also with different researchers that have investigated different types of sentence level instruction. There's some wonderful things out there like sentence combining that we could get into if we have some time, but there's a wide variety of different types of instruction for sentences. But the research is clear that explicit instruction, so having students receive a very clear model in language that's understandable to them on, here is sentence structure, so here's a structure of a sentence, here are the conventions involved into it, has been shown to improve not only their writing fluency, so that's the amount of different texts that they can write, so pen to paper that they can write down within a set amount or a brief amount of time. So that has not only been shown to improve their writing fluency, it also, I think importantly, has been shown to improve their writing quality. So the quality would be something related to, let's say, how the ideas are organized, or just the overall impression that readers get on, okay, I understand or I rate highly what these ideas being communicated are. And I think one of the reasons why that is because we haven't even talked about these other aspects that are involved in writing. So we've talked about syntax, semantics, handwriting, spelling. There's also this huge self-regulatory process, so self-regulation, to where when we engage in writing, we tend to stop and start quite a bit. Same thing with reading. And, even this morning, I was kind of quickly responding to some emails. And usually when I click reply, I kind of reflect on, okay, what am I trying to say? And then I'll start writing down. And I don't know about you, Cheryl, I'm a chronic overuser of the exclamation mark in my emails, to where I'll be like, hello, oh, great, exclamation. And then so I'll have to kind of stop and start and go like, okay, wait a minute, I need to remove some of these exclamation marks. I've definitely sent some emails without that stop and start, and I've usually regretted every single time I've sent those emails. But so we tend to stop and start. So all these things going into play: handwriting, spelling, sentence structure, capitalization, punctuation, usage, syntax, semantics, self-regulation. All that is competing for just our space, just our mental space. We have cognitive resources that we can only pay attention to a set amount of things. We can think consciously about, like, what am I thinking about? What am I doing? And we can't pay attention to all those different things in writing all the time very well. So different aspects, particularly sentence writing, if we can commit that to long-term memory, to where we don't have to actively think about it, that's the goal. So
Wow.
I want, in my research, in other words, and the research of different scholars out there, we want students to almost have an intuitive understanding on sentence structure and sentence writing, so they don't have to think about it anymore. We want them to focus in on the juicy aspects of writing, what the ideas are, what are different reasons, what are the different reasons you're trying to express, explanations, etc. So with explicit instruction in writing, that tends to be the most efficient, effective way of quickly helping students understand what is sentence writing, so they can commit those aspects to long-term memory.
Wow. That, it speaks volumes as to, again, why I think sentence writing is not necessarily focused on. It's a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's complex.
Yeah.
It's complex, and perhaps teachers not having that explicit instruction themselves on how to
Mhm.
do it
Yeah.
is difficult. And then if they didn't get it in school, it is even more difficult, right?
Oh,
So so thank God, Peter Parker. I mean, Sean, you're so I'd like to say, that, you mentioned handwriting,
Mhm.
specifically. But I know there are folks that I've heard. I have a hard time teaching kindergartners, for example, or first graders who to write when they don't actually
Mhm.
know how to form letters. How does
Yeah.
handwriting, or the lack of being able to write by hand,
Yeah.
impact students' ability to even write a strong sentence?
Yeah. So I don't know, I think, Cheryl, you and I are probably around the same age. Hopefully that wasn't impolite of me to say.
Yeah,
You
no,
look a lot better than I do. But
we're we're both definitely very young.
that's true. That's what I meant by it. You're right. Yeah. So I think you could probably relate to this, to where I remember getting notes from doctor notes, or, if I missed school, that were handwritten that I could barely read.
Right.
And I think now, as a lot of the doctor notes are kind of typed up, and then you kind of get a printout. But I think that the larger idea that I'm trying to express here is that handwriting doesn't need to be perfect. So obviously, you and I saw doctors, so the handwriting was almost illegible. So you can obviously succeed, but there does tend to be a tipping point. So handwriting needs to be automatic enough. So it needs to be legible enough, and it needs to be quick enough to where you don't have to consciously attend to each letter of the alphabet. So in other words, if you have to actively, as a student, as a doctor, as anybody, if you have to actively think about, okay, wait a minute, how is the letter A formed? Again, that's conscious attention that you need to pay to that you're drawing your memory resources to. And then, unfortunately, you can't attend to why are you even writing this note in the first place. So handwriting is a huge part of early literacy. So in kindergarten grades, it also, I think, presents an excellent opportunity for teachers who could be already stressed on, I need to teach reading. Now you're saying I need to teach writing. The great thing is that if students are already focused in on the individual letters at early elementary, that here's the letter M, this is how you form it, you can teach handwriting or writing right alongside reading. So here's the letter name, M, and also it makes the letter sound mm. And what we see across different studies is that particularly if you focus in on writing, handwriting or spelling right along when students are reading, you're going to see gains in both. So we see growth in not only reading but also writing scores. And I think that there's another important point here that even though we can think of science of reading and science of writing as being separate, reading and writing develop pretty well together. So when students are learning important letter sounds, learning different vocabulary words, learning reading syntax, we tend to see those students also have increases in their writing scores and vice versa. So as students learn reading, they tend to apply those to writing. But again, we can't just assume that they're going to catch it and then apply it to their writing. What has been shown just through different research studies is that if we can provide directed if we can direct students to now apply that explicitly to their writing, that we can see, that's when we see the gains most frequently.
That's fantastic, Shawn. Thanks for reminding us that it's important for sure. And that also they can do it alongside reading. That's, people need to know that it's not one more thing to add to their plate, right?
Right.
How does strong sentence instruction support students' thinking, not their written output? You talk about these juicy sentences, right? So how do you get to thinking as well as juicy sentences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I think particularly I get that question from early elementary educators whose students are still working on the basic building blocks of forming letters. So what does sentence instruction look like there? And then how does it just help overall thinking? And I think one of the key parts of sentence writing instruction is oral language. So even if a student is having difficulty actually writing the sentence out, they can still practice just through vocally saying sentences and responding, having exposure to the rich language and different words that are used to express complete thoughts. So what that specifically means is that, again, in complete sentences, we can think about those as just remove that word sentences and just have it be complete thoughts. So it is expressing to a listener or a reader an idea with, let's say, it has a set action, and you're talking about a detail or an idea specific to that main subject.
Sure.
And so if you take a look at different models of prevalent in the science of reading, like Scarborough's rope or the simple view of reading, if you take a look at prevalent models in writing as well, an aspect that isn't talked about quite a bit, but that is also needs, I think, to have increased attention and a spotlight shown on it is oral language. So students are constantly pulling on their language that they would just say out loud into now translating it by the hand. So again, to keep going with Virginia Berninger's analogy of language by the eye is reading, language by the mouth, and then language by the hand. So connecting all those systems into now students are talking to themselves, which can sound kind of weird, but that's basically what we're doing as writers. We are engaged in a lot of self-talk. And so we are really translating or talking to ourselves and then expressing it through a pen and paper or through typing. So the ideas, the different ways of thinking, the different ways of communicating to peers or to teachers, those can all be done vocally. So if I can just take another moment, so if you think about early elementary educators who might be listening to this, and they're like, oh, sentence writing, I want to help set up my students for success in sentence writing, but my students still working, let's say, on handwriting or spelling. That's completely fine. What you can do in that instance then is focus in on instruction on sentence talking. So in addition to sentence writing, sentence talking would be helping students express their complete thoughts in complete sentences. Can be a way to where now students, when they engage in handwriting and spelling and they catch up with those skills, they already have that oral language experience of saying complete sentences, and then they can kind of hit the ground running a little quicker, so to speak.
Wow, that's I think oral language is critical, and it's something that never stops growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really important even for older students, for those teachers to be focusing on that, talking as well, sentence talking. I
Right.
love.
And I think you see this. I mean, if you talk to any elementary teacher, so even so, again, to bring up my 4-year-old, he's a big and then. He's in that and then phase to where he'll say sentences, he'll say complete sentences. They're all strung together with an and then, and then, and then, and then, and then.
Right.
And then it's not surprising then when you take a look at early elementary writing, when students are writing, there's a lot of and then, and then, and then, and then it's kind of like a series of
Sure.
different things. So it can be a great way to even kind of just talk through like, oh, okay, yep, that's a sentence right there, and then okay, now tell me the next thing. So it doesn't have to be time intensive. You're already building on skills that students are already wanting to talk to you about. And so you can just kind of highlight like, oh, yep, that was a sentence. What you just said was a sentence.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, how does knowing how to structure these long, strong, not long, we don't want to say long. How does knowing how to structure and write strong sentences help students when we're really trying to focus also on longer genre writing?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. So I get this sometimes from teachers who are already struggling to find enough time to teach writing in general. So they could be asking themselves an important question on like, okay, so are you telling us that research says you should only teach sentence writing and then not teach the other? Or maybe they're kind of thinking that internally, like, oh, okay, well, if I have, let's say, 30 minutes of writing, do I need to take 25 minutes on sentences and then 5 minutes on extended composition? I don't think that that's really a helpful way to kind of think about things. I've been there as a teacher and trying to think through scheduling, but I think that what research suggests is that writing skills and writing knowledge grow concurrently. So they all grow at the same time. So if you have a student that's learning handwriting or spelling, it's completely fine to work on sentence writing and extended composition at the same time. I'm not telling teachers to have students practice errors and then just go, okay, well, that's what it's going to be. You can only focus in on different parts of instruction at once. You can't focus in on everything or it's going to be overwhelming. So
Right.
like my father, when I was growing up, was a car mechanic. And then so unfortunately, I never really practiced that skill enough to now sometimes when I take my car to the mechanic, I wish I would have paid more attention, but particularly when I get the bill. But so my father would talk through different aspects of a motor, carburetor, an axle, et cetera. And so, unfortunately, I could have probably used more targeted instruction. So I needed to kind of work on the car in general, but it probably would have helped if we just focused in on one part of the car for a little bit, and then
Yeah.
rather than everything. So, and I think that same analogy can be said for writing instruction. So students are going to need the whole car. They're going to be driving. They're going to be writing different things. They need experience with it. They're going to be doing it. But what are you going to choose to focus in on instruction? So as early elementary kiddos are learning the important building blocks of handwriting and spelling, you can engage in oral exercises and also short bits of writing for sentence writing and extended composition. As they start to get more and more spelling and reading skills and handwriting skills under their belt, you can shift to now focusing in on sentence writing and then giving them experience oral language and also writing through extended composition. But then particularly in upper elementary, middle, and then also I would say in some high school instances, really where that connection between spelling, handwriting, typing, etc., and extended composition, that bridge really happens at the sentence level. So in order to effectively tie together writing, spelling, syntax, semantics into telling longer stories or writing persuasive essays, etc., that bridge actually happens through students' ability to express complete thoughts through sentence writing.
Sure.
So I would suggest that sentence writing still has a place in instruction explicitly taught. I think you would need to, where I see some teachers express frustration or certain researchers to where they can say, oh, okay, we're only going to have students just write sentences and never write longer essays or stories. I also see something similar happening to, I know there's been some recent reporting on students not reading whole books anymore, let's say in high school grades. I'm not suggesting that students just write just random unconnected sentences. Ultimately, we want students to write extended compositions. That's an important skill. I think teachers just need to ask themselves, what are the specific skills you're interested in teaching right now? And what level of language you need to work on. Students are going to be working on all these things.
Sure.
They're going to be doing it. It's just, what are you going to specifically pay attention to in instruction? And what we see is that if you do pay at least enough attention to sentence writing, and it doesn't have to be long, in my research studies has been as short as 10 to 25 minutes, is that you can see meaningful growth in student sentence writing that contributes to their extended composition. So I think that that's an important point you bring up, Cheryl, is because I think that I see just some different conversation happening among educators or even researchers on where does sentence writing fit within
Yeah.
the overall scheme of writing instruction.
Thank you for that. It's important because as you think about all the things that you have to do, I know you do want to get children to write more extended, have more extended time to write, or write extended responses, but you do have to start at that sentence level. When writing instruction is done really well, does it look like in a classroom on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think that's really going to depend on the different grade levels. So let's think about early elementary grades. So if a student is, when I start to work with teachers or districts, one of the first things I do is I ask them what reading curriculum are they using, because many times, unfortunately, reading curriculum will be kind of untethered or cut away from the writing instruction. So when I say, okay, what specific reading skills or what are students reading about? And then that's what I would use to ground the writing instruction. So if students are learning different letters, letter sounds, letter names, perfect place for handwriting and spelling. So what can happen is kind of this intertwined reading and writing block, to where as students are learning letters, letter names, sounds, how to say them, how to pronounce them, how to blend those sounds into words. Teachers can do can have targeted instruction to handwriting and also spelling. And as students are engaged in read alouds, as they're listening or reading more words, they can also themselves produce those oral language stories, those sentences, etc. So if you think about, let's say, a 60-minute reading block, literacy block, I think that particularly early on is that you can cover about half and half, to where students can be learning how to decode, but then they can also learn how to encode at the same time.
Oh,
And what I think can be done is kind of the seamless switching back and forth between when you learn that the letter L is the name, it makes the l sound. Here's how you make the l. And then as they're learning how to blend words, they can also learn how to write those words. So that's early elementary. As students start to pick up important skills on spelling multiple words, etc., again, that same structure can hold, but now students are engaged in more writing. So instead of them orally telling stories, let's say during a read aloud, is now they can start to put pen to paper. They can start to write and describe different things in the environment. So that way the teacher can kind of understand and they can make a connection to what's going on there. And then in upper elementary grades, I think that's where such an excellent opportunity, I think, is underused, to where, and there's a larger conversation on where some educators and researchers talk about early elementary as learning to read and upper elementary as now reading to learn.
Mhm.
And if you think about writing to learn, it is very difficult to commit to memory important parts of what you read without taking some sort of notes.
Huh.
That is a full stop. So if you are engaged in reading and you want to remember key parts, you pretty much have to take notes. I don't know any other way of doing it. And so research has been clear too, is that if students can engage in writing to learn, to where students are taught explicitly that here you can take notes here, you can summarize these into sentences, that makes reading comprehension even that much more meaningful and deep. We actually see increases in reading comprehension scores from students engaged in writing about what they're reading. And then I think if we were to even just take a step back and think about kind of those hard, let's say, college classes that we took, I mean, so much of that studying, we just weren't sitting down and rereading everything. We were actually making notes. We were making flashcards. We were challenging ourselves and trying to recall that from memory. That's because all those things actually work.
Yeah.
So I think that when you take a look at upper elementary or even middle or high school English language arts blocks, I think what you need to see there then is just even a more deeper intertwined connection between here's time for reading, but then it's interspersed with time for writing. Because I think that there's just such power and interconnection between those two.
That's a fantastic response and such a wonderful reminder for our listeners as well, Sean. Thank you. Thank you for that. How can short, focused writing routines support the student and even the teacher for that matter?
Oh yeah, no, that's a great point. I think again, if you think about for the students where their first draft is their last draft, writing can be so aversive to kind of think, because I think the student is thinking like, oh, okay, if I was given 10 minutes to write something and I wrote this story and there's all sorts of misspellings, I'm not quite sure how to spell it. I don't know. I don't quite have a good sense on what the ideas were that I was trying to communicate. Maybe I'll go in and put in some end punctuation marks because my teacher likes likes it when I write complete sentences. So there's all sorts of things. But I think one of the larger lessons there to learn is that perhaps that editing process is so aversive because we've given students such a large chunk of time to write something without kind of a clear focus on what specifically it is attached to focus in on. So I think if you really think deeply about that and embed that thinking into how your lessons are structured, what we've seen across different supplemental or targeted instruction studies is that for these short spurts, you can provide direct focus and on a specific skill. So let's say if the skill happens to be subject-verb agreement. So you can teach subject-verb agreement, but then it needs to be directly connected to what they're writing about. So we can kind of give these short bursts and then give students. So what we see is that one, there's a benefit in kind of chopping that sort of complicated skill up so students know what specifically they're focused in on. But then two, another added benefit that we haven't really talked about is the need to connect these isolated sentence level skills into actual student writing. So we do see some benefits in that grammar instruction, but there's some caveats there. Is that if students just kind of go through these identification exercises to where they identify, oh, here's subject verb agreement, that unfortunately doesn't get committed to memory. That kind of gets lost, and it's like a sandcastle on the beach. It just kind of gets washed away in the tides. In order for that skill to be useful, committed to memory, if that sort of short burst of instruction is done, students now need an opportunity to actually use it in their writing. So sentence writing, extended composition, etc. So these short, sort of structured ways of providing writing instruction also gives instructors and also students an opportunity to then, now I kind of learn a little bit basics of this skill. Now here's an opportunity relatively close by to now use it in extended writing.
So that's I mean that's a really great way to look at that
Hmm.
time period, Sean. Thank you so much. So if you want to move teachers from um, thinking that children can catch
Hmm.
writing and instead move to more like we need to again to teach it. So
Hmm.
moving from taught to taught, what mind shifts do you think need to really happen first? And what kinds of supports can schools provide teachers?
Oh, yeah, great question. So I think that one of the big things that can happen is just broadening the conversation of the science of reading to include writing. So I think that when I work with schools and educators, I think they're having a very good, if I want to say problem, I don't know if that's the right word, but they're having a good problem to where they're like, we're seeing some increases in reading scores. What's next? And so I think that the more that you can focus in on that, it is very difficult to separate high quality reading from high quality writing, that these two things need to happen in order to support continued reading and writing growth. I think that's one of the key ideas, big ideas, that needs to happen in the national conversation in the science of reading. That writing is an integral part of continued reading success. So I think that's one. And I think two is that districts are and educators are just incredibly hungry for different evidence-based tools that they can use, materials, textbooks, websites, many assessments, et cetera, that they can use to translate that idea into actual practice. So I think that in addition to having kind of a broadening the national conversation or within conversations within schools that school leaders can have, is kind of unpacking how interconnected reading and writing is one. But then two is actually following that up with trying different ways, trying different materials that explicitly teach writing, I think is just a huge part in making sure those two things happen. I would, I think we would be missing a larger opportunity here is if all that happens, if teachers think, okay, writing's important, and then they just provide more writing time. I think what that writing time could just end up being is that students just kind of go off in kind of these undirected ways to where
Yeah.
they could certainly express their creativity, but it could be a very difficult kind of creativity to where a reader won't be able to fully appreciate it or understand it or make meaning of it. What needs to happen is that students have opportunities to explicitly learn those skills during that time.
Wow. It's so it's true. Just time isn't always just the answer, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's great,
Yeah.
for sure. And we want to call out that time and make that sacred for teachers,
Hmm.
but just having the time without really having one of the resources, but also to understand that you have to be the driver of that, that you have to
Hmm.
explicitly teach and
Yep.
model is incredibly important. So, Sean, what excites you most about this direction that writing instruction could take if we really got this thing right?
Yeah. I think that I mean, I've talked about some of the gains that science reading has played in improving student reading proficiency. I think that those gains are much needed. They're hard won. It takes an incredible amount of work and dedication from teachers, students, and their families in order to pull that off. Um, I think, though, if we look closer at those numbers, there's still a lot of room to improve. I mean, if we're talking about nationwide reading assessment scores, we're still talking about a sizable number. A third, if not two-thirds, of the students still struggling in the country with reading. With writing, specific measures on that, it's upwards of 7 out of 10 students who struggle with writing. So I think that while we can accentuate the positive and then be very grateful for the improvements in student reading and writing that can only improve their lives, I do think that there is still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in unpacking what are ways of supporting student reading development that continues on. And I think, just from personal experience, but then also from research, that student writing needs to play a critical role in helping students unpack important, complicated text that they are going to experience in middle school, high school, and in college. Writing plays such a key part in documenting their knowledge on what they're reading, but then also allowing them to synthesize their understanding into, oh, I can't tell you how many times, Cheryl, to where I'll write something and go, oh, is that what I think? And then I'll have to like sit down and really think about that and like, oh, okay, actually that doesn't quite make a lot of sense. And then it allows me to kind of shift.
Shawn, I think that's how I process almost everything. My
Yeah.
feelings, my ideas. It is certainly I read it and go, huh, yeah, I
Yeah.
do believe that. Yeah,
Yeah.
or maybe let me tweak this. Or sometimes again, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, I had one of my mentors as an undergrad. He would have us read different books in his class. And one time I took a look at his book that was kind of sitting at the classroom table, and he had notes written all over the margins of the text. And then ever since then, I was just like, I need to do that. And I can't tell you just how many times to where I'll read something and kind of think I understand it. But then
Sure.
when I actually have to synthesize it in my own words, I'm like, oh, okay, actually not quite sure what this is saying.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just a huge part of being a critical reader, to really, you're reflecting constantly on like, oh, wait, and what does that mean? And I can't do that without writing. I don't think anybody really can.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the exciting part of kind of where we're at. And I think people are recognizing the gains that's happening, but then now also asking, well, what needs to happen next in order for these gains to continue?
I love it. One of my favorite things to tell my students to do was to have a conversation with the author. You know,
Oh, yeah.
to really talk to them, ask them these questions,
Yeah.
tell them what you think about that. I
Hmm.
think that's such a wonderful way to, again, make sure that children think it's accessible to them. That
Yeah.
that if I'm talking to Shakespeare, or whether it's whether it's another writer, that
Yeah.
it allows them to see that they can also have these wonderful ideas.
Yeah. Yep.
So, Shawn, as we close, I would love for you to share with our listeners and viewers, for those of us who watch it on YouTube, what would you say to empower teachers, school leaders, and families when it comes to sentence level writing?
Hmm. Great question. I think sentence level writing and focusing in on, let's just call it connected words or connected text, is only accentuating a strength that every student in the country, for the most part, is already doing, which is trying to express what they're seeing, what they're feeling, or something that they want to do. I my my kids are big in a trampoline park. Against my better judgment, I got them a trampoline park membership. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out, but but that is, even that experience has now opened up different words and vocabulary to my little kid at home. And so those types of experiences, where they're now kind of talking about what they're seeing, how they're feeling about it, how awesome it is at the trampoline park in this case, or what they want to do. Sentence level writing only builds on that strength to now teach students explicitly that, hey, those ideas that you were talking about right there, if you structure this in such a way when you're writing, it is going to make it easier for everybody to understand, myself, your peers, etc., what it is you're trying to express. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of strength building that happens with focusing in on that. So I think that would be one. And then I think two would be that sentence level writing. When you think about instruction as just being, just as brass tacks, is a knowledgeable, caring adult that's trying to provide opportunities of success to a classroom full of kids and to have success enough to where they remember it. Really, the quickest way of doing that in overall writing happens at the sentence level, because students, you can give students, let's say, 10 minutes to write one story. Within that story, they could write, let's say, 10 sentences. So if you're trying to give them volleys or opportunities to be successful, you can focus in on each individual sentence and give them 10 opportunities for success to where they can build that up and remember it inside that larger one opportunity of a one story or one essay. So again, it can build on student strength, but then two, it also increases the amount of opportunities that you can give a student on committing to memory a successful part of what they're doing in the school day. And I think for some students, that happens too infrequently, that students aren't experiencing enough success at school.
Wow, that speaks to the very core of who we are, Shawn, that
Oh, yeah.
we want children to make sure that, success breeds success.
Yep.
And when children feel successful, they want to go back
Oh,
and
yeah.
do it again, even in writing and even in reading, for sure.
Mhm.
So, Shawn, how can people get in touch with you? If they want to follow you or if they want to know more about sentence level writing, how can they do that?
Yeah, so feel free to email me. It's just my name, Shawn-Datchuk at uiowa.edu. I'm also on Twitter, Blue Sky. I have a burgeoning Facebook. I don't know. There's too many social media things out there, Cheryl. So sometimes it's mostly dad jokes that I post on there. But yeah, so feel free to contact me. I work with educators across the country. I'm happy to chat. If there's anything that I can do to kind of make it a little easier for teachers. And then finally, if you go to my website, not the most creative thing I've ever done, but it's just my name. So it's just ShawnDatchuk.com. I have different free resources out there that kind of unpack sentence writing for teachers.
Awesome, Shawn. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today. I thank you for your insights. It really does help us remember that oral language is important and that reading and writing are absolutely connected. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks for really taking this on because you were struggling as a teacher. How awesome is that?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Cheryl. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.